Hey, this is Mark Smolin up in Big Fork, Montana. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time and give you some information about the Recreational Trail Program, which is RTP, and what it is, what's going on, what we need to stay focused on, and what different clubs and organizations here in Montana need to know about RTP. So the first thing you need to know is RTP is a federal grant program. The money comes from the federal highway fuel tax, and a certain small percentage has been earmarked for recreation. The Federal Highway Administration is responsible for pushing that money out to all the different states, and in Montana it's administered by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, or FWP. Within the law, 30% of all the funds have to go to motorized use, 30% go to non-motorized, and 40% go to mixed use. This 30% that is earmarked for motorized use is extremely important because that's what more or less guarantees a lot of funding for snowmobile trail grooming here in Montana. Without that law, it's doubtful as to whether or not we would actually see the same levels of funding that we would get otherwise for grooming. Typical uses for RTP include trail creation, whether it be snowmobile, mountain bike, hiking, different OHV trails, but the actual building of trails. Trail maintenance, whether that's brushing, reconditioning, rebuilding of bridges, ponchons, turnpikes, things like that. Trail grooming, cross-country ski trails, snowmobile trails, but also when it comes to hauling the groomers, working on the groomers, maintaining them, the oil they use, all of those things, fuel, everything like that counts up under grooming. Signage and signing of trails, as we know, signs are very expensive but needed. So many clubs put in for actual signage, whether it be kiosks or actual trail signs out on the trails, things like that. Avalanche centers for the forecasting, safety classes, seminars, all of those things that the avalanche centers do for us are funded under RTP, not completely by RTP, but RTP makes up a good chunk of their funding. Snow rangers from the United States Forest Service, trail stewards in the summertime that take out volunteers to work on trails, parking lots, toilet installations, city parks, and even land purchases where private land in key areas might come up for sale, and RTP might get used to purchase that and push it into a public stewardship. But within RTP, I would say federal funding is tenuous. It's not in danger of going away, but certainly anything could happen, and especially with recent times and recent emergency spending, anything could happen. The Federal Highway Administration is funded under the FAST Act. However, this year the FAST Act expired, so it was good for 5 years, and it is now expired. So what that means is Congress has to create new legislation for a new version of the FAST Act, which would probably be called the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. But that will some version of that will have to get done this year in order to fund the Federal Highway Administration for next year, and that includes RTP. The Federal Highway Administration was geared at being funded via the fuel tax, but that fuel tax doesn't actually cover all of the expenditures from the Highway Administration. So the Highway Administration with the FAST Act have habitually been funded using deficit spending. So if we look at fiscal year 2016, $43 billion was spent, $36 billion came in via the fuel tax, which really meant $7 billion was left to be funded via deficit spending. So, and that happens every year. The fuel tax is a fixed amount. It is not indexed for inflation. Therefore, as everything has gone up in price, the fuel tax is not kept up. A couple of things just to think about. So with this latest COVID emergency, we all stayed home for months lowering tax revenue. We're not out filling our tanks as often, so there's going to be less tax revenue flowing to the federal government. We all drive more efficient vehicles every year, and those require less fuel, so again, there's less revenue going to the Federal Highway Administration. So all of these things should make you go, how are we going to keep RTP funded? So just a couple other, hard issues that, the fuel tax is set at 18.4 cents per gallon and 24.4 cents per gallon of diesel. And again, that's not indexed for inflation. So as the wholesale prices for not just fuel, but everything goes up, the gas tax stays the same. So it's kind of nice from our pocketbook standpoint, but it's not so nice when it comes to wanting good roads, good trails, all of those kinds of things. And politically, none of our congressmen want to be labeled as the person that raised the cost of living. So this is a political football that keeps getting kicked down the road. It's easier for them to basically live off budget, use deficit spending, and to cover all the costs of keeping us on the road. But sooner or later, one of these birds is going to have to come home to roost, and it really makes for some interesting conversations. How should the gas tax be changed, if at all, or is there a different way we should fund highways and roads and trails and things like that? How does this affect RTP? Well, a couple good things. The RTP is a really small percentage of the overall spending, like 2%. So it's not a big line item. However, it is a line item. Everything's always on the table when Congress debates a bill. The silver lining here is, again, everything has been funded throughout the years, even though the tax revenues never kept pace. So hopefully RTP will stay static and keep moving forward as time goes on. Congress can and will look for line items to kill and reduce spending. So that's something that we as taxpayers and or just citizens need to stand up and voice our opinions on when the time comes. And I would say the time is now to write your federal elected officials and just tell them how important this is to you and how important it is that you want RTP to continue. The time to support the MSA is also now. The Montana Snowmobile Association is one of the few groups here in the state that actually fights for our rights, especially in the motorized section, to have access to public lands and have access to RTP money. And they go to Washington on our behalf every single year and meet with everyone. So it's a good time to join the MSA. So let's switch gears a little bit and just talk about RTP funding and how do you get funded, how do you use the grant money and things like that. So the first thing you need to do is you have to plan ahead. There are a number of key things that you have to do up front. So you got to get your ducks in a row before you actually log in and apply for a grant. You have to be a legally recognized entity, so whether it's a nonprofit or a corporation, things like that, but you have to be a legally recognized entity. You have to have money for qualifying matching dollars. So when you apply for an RTP grant, you have to come up with 20% match dollars. So in other words, if you're going to get $50,000, you have to also put in $10,000 towards your spending. So you're going to need that money. You also have to have money on hand to spend before you can actually get grant money. So in other words, when you get a grant award, you don't get written a check. You're basically given the right to go spend money and later get reimbursed for that spending. So that's the difference, and you need to know that going in. So in other words, you have to have a bank account before you can actually get things rolling. You also have to get all the related permits and paperwork. So if you're doing work on Forest Service property, DNRC property, this requires paperwork, NEPA requirements, exclusions, cost-sharing agreements, all of those kinds of things, maps of where you're going to go, maps showing the trails. All of those documents have to be produced and ready to go. Finally, you apply for the grant. That opens in November and it's due January 30th or 31st. And you need to work on that grant during that time frame. You cannot apply previous to when it opens up. Once you're awarded, then you perform the work, you spend some money, you apply for reimbursement with all your supporting documents and receipts, and eventually you get reimbursed. Your work's not over yet. You then still get to file some reports in the system. Everything is done electronically, online. So you apply online, you apply for your reimbursement online, and then you file your reports online. And then once you're done, you repeat as necessary. So like for a lot of the snowmobile clubs, cross-country ski clubs, this means you were applying every year or every other year for funding. Key areas to pay attention to. First thing I would say is attend the grant training sessions that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks puts on every year. You will learn an incredible amount of information. They're going to tell you what's important for you, where how things get scored based on how you answer questions, things like that. But they're also there after the fact to help you if you need help. Have a dedicated person that administers your grant. Pay this person. It is money well spent. And the pay that you issue can be counted toward your match. So do not try to administrate a grant with multiple people. It will end up being a mess, and people will be stepping on each other. So generally, it's a good idea to have one, maybe two people that know what's going on and can keep things flowing. Next, I would say follow the rules within your grant agreement to the letter. This is so important. You need to spend the money on time. You have to keep detailed and clean documentation and receipts and a paper trail for everything. File for your reimbursements on time. File for your reports on time. Do not make them come looking for you. It will buy you more bad blood than you can even imagine. Breaking the rules does have consequences. Every entity that gets a grant has a risk assessment performed on them. And if that goes up, that is bad. Your entity, what it means is in follow-on years, you could be denied funding in future grants or cut out altogether. A high-risk assessment also generally means that you're going to be subject to further audits. So even while your grant is ongoing. So be aware of that. And it really just comes down to following the rules. And when you have a question and you're not sure about something, call the grant administration people at FWP and ask. They are there to help. They are wonderful people, and they want to give the help that you need. A little bit about the grant review process. It's an interesting process. As I mentioned, I am actually on the State Trails Advisory Committee. I was appointed by Governor Bullock 3 years ago. I've served 3 terms now, or 3 years for my first term, and I have the option of renewing for another term, which I plan to do. Applications are submitted, like I said, by January 30th. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks reviews them internally, make sure they meet the minimum qualifications, and then they score them on a variety of criteria. And there are 2 general groups of grants. There's a large group grant, which is greater than $70,000 and up to $100,000, and then normal grants, which are less than $70,000. Important to note, you can put in small grants, but for the level of paperwork and everything else, FWP likes to see grants that are at least $10,000. And grants are open for 2 years, so you can apply. If you only needed $5,000 for this year, you can apply for 2 years and apply for $10,000. And then it makes it a lot more sensible to apply every other year in that case. So then once they've done their reviews, they turn it over to the STAC, and the STAC reviews all the grants and scores each of them individually. So we each log into the system, each of us reviews every single grant, and there's about 12 people on the stack. And we read through them, we score them in the system, and then finally, in April, we get together as a committee for 2 days and we review them with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, a Highway Administration official, Forest Service, BLM, and a few Montana DOT. They're also there as well. So all of these different groups are there to give us guidance related to these different projects. Some have, like, for instance, if one has a impact on a road or something like that, the Montana DOT is there to give us guidance and tell us how to proceed with those things. Finally, award decisions are made. We go through all the grants. We say how much we want to fund. We total it all up, and if we're over, if we've awarded too much money, then we have to go back and look at all the grants and decide which ones we want to trim out. Maybe we'll partial fund some, trim it out. If we haven't awarded enough money based on what we have, we'll go back and we'll look at some of those that we partial funded and maybe add to it and allow those other groups to get a little bit more money. So we then finally look at the breakdown of how much did we give to motorized versus non-motorized, and we keep going that way. And finally, once we've got all the numbers meshing, Fish, Wildlife, and Park notifies all the applicants on funding or non-funding. Those that got funding get their grant contract agreement delivered to them in late summer, and the grantees then sign and return that, and your grant period opens up for reimbursement, usually in August. And then your grant starts, and you've got 6 months to make your first reimbursement request, and that's an important rule. But all of that will be laid out in your grant contract agreement. So again, follow the rules, and everybody moves smoothly. So how much does Montana actually get? Montana typically gets about $1.4 million from the Highway Administration to distribute each year. Sometimes we have some money left over from previous years where money went unused, somebody couldn't get their project done or whatever, and they ran out of time, so the money was returned to the system, and we're allowed to move that money forward into the current year. But not always, but sometimes, but usually we're able to move it forward. In 2020, we had $1.6 million to award this year, and those awards will be going out shortly. Usually, we award somewhere between 2 and 6 large grants, and as I mentioned before, we've got the breakdown of 30 for motorized, 40% for mixed use, and 30% for non-motorized. The avalanche centers, just a couple key groups here I want to mention. Avalanche centers are usually funded in the high range of the normal grants, but not always. They have to follow the rules too, and it is not automatic. We usually have 5 to 6 snowmobile clubs applying and another 5 to 6 cross-country ski clubs. So all of those are in the grooming piece. They apply usually every year or every other year and have their money moving forward all the time. So that is one of the areas that we see over and over again. Some other sources of funding and just some thoughts related to this is in Montana we have a state trail pass that goes for grooming and trail upkeep. Many of the smaller clubs rely solely on the money that is given out through that state grant that comes from the trail pass. That money, importantly, can be used as RTP match. So remember, you have to, if you apply for RTP, you need 20% money. So the money that you get from the state from the Trail Pass grant can be used as RTP match. However, the grant that is usually awarded from the Trail Passes is usually much smaller compared to RTP. Usually usually about 1/3 to about 2/3 for RTP for some of the bigger groups out there. I'd like you just to think about, for those areas that are high use, that groups that groom a lot, think about how much grooming goes on and what it might look like if we only had 1/3 of our funding. it would be pretty uncomfortable on those trails. Just going to say that. I also want to point out that the stack is going to have open positions soon. And this is something you can watch if you search for State Trail Advisory Committee, Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks on Google. You'll find that, or you can contact me and I'll send you the link to the page. But we will have positions. Positions are sort of earmarked based on the type of position. Motorized, which I am, non-motorized, mixed use positions, things like that. And these positions are going to come open. Next year we will have about half of the stack rolling off after their second term. And if you're a motorized person and you care a lot about seeing this funding going forward, I highly encourage you to apply. It is a fair amount of work for a short period of time each spring, but it's really rewarding and it really does make a difference. And we need people that understand how important this funding is to be on that stack. That's the bottom line. We also need to be vigilant over the grant review processes going forward. Things can change, people's priorities can change, different entities, state or federal entities can change. So we just need to be vigilant long term. I don't foresee a big problem, but I'm just encouraging everyone to stay involved, understand how this stuff happens, and understand when your voice needs to be heard. Finally, I've seen other groups do this, and I think it's a great idea. Invite the stack members that you may know, or people that are in your area, and or the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks personnel, the folks from Helena or your local people. Invite them out to your area. Take them for a ride. Take them for a hike. Do whatever. Show them what you're doing. Show them how much this means to you, and show them how you're making good use of your grant money. And I tell you, I've seen this pay dividends in the long run. Some key takeaways from all of this is RTP funding is super important to our state. We couldn't do a lot of the grooming that we do if we didn't have it. But it is tenuous and subject to congressional whims. We have to be really vigilant with our congressmen and make sure they are fighting for us. RTP funding is not automatic. If you have been successful for a number of years, do not take your past success for granted. The grant process has gotten super competitive, and we're only seeing roughly 65% of the grants that we review get funded. We reviewed over 70 grants this year, 45 of which got funded. So understand that you can lose purely based on the competition. You could write a really good grant, but somebody could write a better grant, and you could get pushed down to the bottom of the stack for that. So just do not take it for granted. Follow every rule. Do not miss deadlines. Just when you do get awarded the money, just follow the rules. It's as simple as that. Write your congressman, encourage them to include and or increase RTP funding in the new FAST Act / Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill. It doesn't take long. You can look up your congressman online. You can file the letter online. You can write your little letter and note right online and just say, this is really important to me. It's important to my area. It's important to the economy. Just let them know how that you're watching and you're going to hold them accountable for this. Support and join the MSA. I mentioned this. If you can, get the license plate. It's a great license plate. It's a beautiful license plate. It really helps the MSA fund all the work they do. They not only go to Washington and fight for us, but they also fight legal battles. They fund legal battles where certain areas are getting areas closed off that have typically been open, and they help local groups fight for their access to public lands. The MSA also does a great job with the Trans-Montana snowmobile ride, raising awareness and money for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They work with the Veterans Administration providing PTSD support, as well as they work on teen suicide prevention across the state. It is a great group. We've raised raised $30,000 this year with the Trans-Montana, and if you can, come on out and ride the Trans-Montana. It is a wonderful, wonderful week spent in some of the best country in Montana. Support your local avalanche center. Everybody should understand how important it is that these avalanche centers stay productive and stay active. We need them. They keep us safe. They keep people warned. They keep people trained. It's super important. So support them. But that also means making sure that your local Forest Service supervisor and regional manager knows how important it is and how much you appreciate that avalanche center to you. The Forest Service actually is responsible for the creation and maintenance of the Avalanche Center. That's why I'm telling you this. Most people don't understand that the Forest Service has a huge part to play in this, and they need to know that this is important to us. Finally, buy a trail pass. Come on, it's $20 for 2 years. Every penny of it goes back to the trails. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks doesn't even keep the money for the creation of the sticker. They fund that out of other budgets. So 100% of that money goes back to the trails. Buy a trail pass. It's really simple, and it's really cheap, and it's a great way to support all of this. Finally, I'm happy to help. I've been in this now for 3+ years. I've got another 3 years or more left to go on the stack. I've learned a ton about RTP and the other grant systems out here in the state. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to help you get rolling. Write me, call me, and just if I can help, I will. If nothing else, I will point you to the right person that can help you. Thanks for listening. Stay involved. Hold our congressman, accountable, and let's keep our access to well-groomed trails, well-maintained trails open for everybody. Thanks for listening.